Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to our campus political organizations debate 2014. Thank you all guys for you guys. Oh, okay. We have our college Democrats. We have our Young Americans for Liberty. And our college Republicans. All right, so basically the rules for the debate is that there will be 5 topics: education, immigration, national security, healthcare, and the economy. There'll be 3 questions for each section. A question will be asked to a certain organization. That organization has 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer the question, and then the other 2 organizations has 1 minute and 15 seconds to rebut that question, to rebut that answer of that organization. Something that we've added is called 2 challenges, and so in each organization will get 2 challenges in which they may pose a direct question to another organization, just one or the other, not both. This may happen at any time, and the organization just needs to invoke the challenge. The question must be relevant to the topic of the section the debate is in when the question is asked. The question must also be one-part question and be kept brief. The organization that was challenged will have 1 minute and 15 seconds, to answer the question. To invoke the challenge, we just ask that you just raise your hand and say you have a challenge, and then we will execute that challenge. Audience members, I know you guys are going to be lively. I know you guys want to say a lot of things. I know there might be some outbursts, but we'd love if you can keep that to a minimum because we are kind of like on a deadline and we want to get you guys out of here as quickly as possible. I totally forgot to do this. My name is Otis Vergara. I am the managing editor at the University Star, and our moderators will be Ray Leonios. He is the KTSW news director, Other Side Drive. We have Nicole Barrios, our assistant news editor at the University Star. Alexa Tavares, news reporter for the University Star. And our 4th moderator is Mariah Samek. She is a senior news reporter at the University Star. Good luck to you guys, and Ray will kick it off with the first question.
All right, so the first topic is going to be education, and the first question goes to the college Democrats. What would you do to further address the growth in both student loan debt and the cost of college? And how would you ensure that more Americans can afford a college education?
Well, a large reason for the growth in tuition at universities, not the only reason, but a large reason, is the fact that states are not funding education at as high a level as they used to. And the federal government isn't funding it very much either. Percentage-wise, yes, you can say that the funding's gone up. Per capita, according to the population, no, it hasn't. It's actually stagnated and in some areas gone down. Funding education better at the state level primarily would be one of the biggest fixes you could do for that. Students wouldn't have to take out nearly as much. It used to be several years ago you could have a job during the summer, pay for most of your tuition throughout the rest of the year. So one of the first concerns I would say is why aren't we funding education as high at the state level? Texas ranks one of the lowest, not only in terms of high school dropouts, but remedial courses want kids to get to college. And in terms of high student loan debt, it's one of the highest student loan debts in the entire United States. So first off, priority, funding education a lot better. It's going to be one of the key concerns, I would say.
Okay. Next, college Republicans, you'll have 1 minute and 15 seconds to rebuttal.
Absolutely. That is a valid point that student loan debt is rising within the state of Texas as well as across the nation. And one of the main reasons why that's happening is the subsidization of higher education in and of itself. So a lot of times what's happening is the reason why tuition and thus student loans are going up is because the government is actually funding, or they're actually saying, we're going to write a check to these people who are lending money, and then we're going to ask them to pay it back. Well, if you're a higher education institution and you have people who are getting free money from the government, and then all of a sudden, as public education institutions, they now have the ability to raise tuition prices at will because now they know that a student is going to get federal loan dollars coming to them. And that's one of the main problems that the Republican side sees is we need to come up with a way, I don't want to say privatize student loans, but I want to say that maybe we need to have some ability to regulate that area in terms of the federal government and what kind of loans how much we give out to students.
I mean, education, the issue with the price of education is basic economics, basic supply and demand. Our public school systems are funneling all of these college kids, all of the focus is on college prep, get these kids into college. And so colleges are having a really hard time coping with the supply or with this demand for education, and so they're raising prices, both because they know that students feel like they have to go to college in order to have a worthwhile vocation after they get out of school, and because it's part of a way to deal with the influx of students. I think that the best way to address this is going to be to actually move away from our traditional collegiate education system. I think that there's, unfortunately, a lot of college graduates are graduating and finding that they can't find worthwhile work, or that their work isn't worth as much as it used to be. That's why people are having a lot of issues paying off loans. I think that a transition to more pushing people towards vocational schools, apprenticeships, that kind of thing is much more helpful. And when you graduate or when you're in college, you have to do internships and stuff anyway, which is basically the same thing. College is proving that you can complete a project, and then when you get a job, they retrain you for it anyway. So why don't we just skip the signaling and jump straight to the point? You know, get into an industry that you're interested in, that you can make a livelihood in. All kinds of trades and stuff right now are really hurting for workers, welders, plumbers, electricians. You can bank on those occupations, and people aren't doing that because schools are pushing kids in other directions.
Thank you. The next question will be addressed to the college Republicans. Should Texas State University and Texas schools implement mandatory health and wellness programs for their students?
I see both sides of that issue. I see health and wellness as a very important aspect of a college, and I'm assuming we're talking about higher education here. In terms of higher education, health and wellness is a big part of what goes on here at the university in terms of keeping our students healthy. So I think it's very important that we have a program. However, I don't think that we need to be pouring in more tax dollars and raising tuition in order to subsidize the health spectrum here on the campus. You know, we've got people on this campus who get sick all the time, and then we have people who never get sick, but the people who never get sick are paying all this money for the people who do get sick. It's a fundamental issue that ranges not only at this university, but across the whole range of spectrum of, you know, here to the city government to, you know, state and then to national. It's, you know, I think that health and wellness is very important, but I also think that we have to balance that with the cost that individuals are paying in things like tuition and money that taxpayers are paying to the government, so then that money can come back to our university.
And the college Democrats, you'll have 1 minute 15 rebuttal.
Sure. Well, actually, the facts are in. The states that spend more to prepare students in terms of health and wellness education, making smarter choices, who invest that money, they actually wind up spending less money overall as a state because students are more prepared to make healthier choices, not just with respect to their diet or their exercise, but with respect to sex education or any other realm of choice they might make in their lives. So actually, it isn't the case that tax dollars are just going to go to some random black hole that we want to call health and wellness education. It has an effect, a ripple effect, as it turns out, on the rest of the state, generally speaking.
I think that as far as mandating, that's kind of a loaded word, but I think that colleges as private institutions it's their prerogative to implement health and wellness programs if they wish to do so, and I think that that's definitely a point that they can use to market to students who are their customer base. I think that it should not be a matter of like state legislation mandating that universities provide these policies. I think that it should definitely be something that you let the market decide. I would predict that the majority of people enjoy being healthy and would enjoy going to a campus that has good health and wellness programs, and so that would be a selling point. You know, whenever you go to a university, you're paying them to give you an education, and you're paying them for a lot of services, and if those are services and an education that you want, then you better be willing to pay for them.
There's a challenge.
Would you like to move the challenge?
Well, I would like to challenge the idea of colleges necessarily being private institutions. Being publicly regulated at the level that colleges are and being funded at the level colleges are necessarily means they generally are not private institutions and thus are beholden to public regulations, and it's not letting the market decide at that point with the vast majority of colleges.
Did you have a question?
So in that case, why would
Who are you
you...
addressing your question?
Oh, to the Young Americans for the Read. At that point, why is it responsible to quote unquote let the market decide when we do have a public risk and a public health concern to worry about when it comes to education?
I would say that, okay, I should rephrase, whenever I said private institutions, I believe that all universities should be private institutions. I don't think that they should be publicly subsidized, so go with that caveat. In addition to that, the ones that are currently publicly subsidized, I guess, my answer to that would be that yes, there is definitely there's a public health risk and a need that needs to be addressed. I think that the market adequately addresses it without the state needing to come in and do that. I think that maybe the one key there where we might see, like I might be able to give a little bit would be vaccines. I definitely think that, you know, in terms of not vaccinating your children, that does create a huge public health risk that infringes on the rights of others. So I think that in that way I could give that if there are acts that somebody are doing that are infringing on the rights of others by not taking care of themselves or not taking care of their environment, then I could see policy being implemented like in that way.
Young Americans for Liberty. How does federalism cause conflict in creating access to equal education for all American citizens? And should U.S. citizen minor children be allowed equal access to education?
Can you repeat the last part of that
Yeah.
question?
And should U.S. citizen minor children be allowed equal access to education?
Should U.S. citizen minor children? What do you mean by that?
Under 17, is that what?
Yeah.
Are they not having equal access to education? I'm sorry, the question's very convoluted. I'm having a hard time understanding it.
I think we meant immigrant children, sorry.
Immigrant children. Okay, so how does federalism? Okay, no, you're fine. So how does federalism impact? Okay, so the best answer that I can come up with this is the fact that anything that's federally mandated, that the federal government provides money for, there's a lot of regulations and stipulations that go along with that. And the libertarian position on this is decentralization is always better because the people at the base of an issue, the people who are running the school, people who are asking for education, they know what their needs and their problems are, and they're the ones best suited to create solutions to those problems. So we would say that federalism always comes with a catch. It always comes with regulation. Nobody gives money for free for anything. So in that way, we think that privately regulated everything would be better. As far as immigrant children, the huge issue revolving around immigrants and education is the idea that publicly funded universities, or people thinking that publicly funded money shouldn't go towards the education of immigrant children. I don't think that public money should really be a thing. So I would say that immigrant children, if they can afford education, then they should be they're more than welcome to participate in the market like everybody else.
Okay. College Republicans, you have a minute 15.
In terms of the federalism response, me personally, I kind of agree with what the libertarian, the Young Americans for Liberty
It's fine,
said.
it's libertarian.
But in terms of, I think the bigger issue is the providing access to the immigrant children, and that's honestly an issue that came up in the last legislative session with what we call the DREAM Act, basically allowing the funding of immigrant children in the education system. And that's something that as Republicans, or at least as college Republicans goes, we do not support that stance. And the reason why we don't support that stance is because there are individuals who have been in this, you know, they are citizens of this state, they are citizens of this country, they have paid taxes, their parents have paid taxes. I'm not saying that if they're immigrants and they're paying taxes that they shouldn't be afforded the same right, but I also agree with the Young Americans for Liberty in that if they can afford the education, I believe that, you know, they can find ways to be able to pay for their collegiate experience. And it doesn't have to be on the federal taxpayer or state taxpayer's dime.
Can I challenge that? Or do you want to wait?
Let's have
Okay.
the rebuttal first and then you can challenge that.
Yeah, it's a lot. I would say first off, the DREAM Act is probably the most practical answer that has come to that question. Yes, I do believe that if you're a child of parents that have come here undocumented, you didn't make the choice to come here, but you still need to be educated. And in the event that you stay in this country, we want to talk about the market. We want to talk about people that have to deal with other human beings in this country. We wouldn't want them to be uneducated, I don't assume. If we were having them, you know, employed, or if we were having them go deal with schools, we would want them to be as educated as we'd like them. And I don't think that, you know, denying them education out of oh, I've had to pay some taxes before. Well, we all have to pay taxes. But we're all children of immigrants at some level coming into this country. The fact that 4-year-olds who were brought here by their parents are going to be told, no, as long as you're here, you're not going to be educated as well as anyone else. Personally, no, I don't stand for that. I don't think that's right, just because there was an imaginary line drawn, and these 4-year-olds, for example, were brought over on the other side of it. No, I don't think that that's right. In terms of federalism, no, I don't think that decentralizing is always the best thing. I don't think any one thing is always the best thing. I don't think that that's practical in life, and it's certainly not in politics.
I'll withdraw it.
You will drop
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to be moving on to the immigration topic now. So if you'd like to rotate your speakers, you have 1 minute to do so.
Want to talk about immigration?
Okay, so we're going to start our immigration portion of the debate, and I believe Alexa will start off this round.
The first question is for the college Republicans. Would sealing off our borders from immigrants solve America's issues with immigration?
Yes and no. I think if somebody from another country is bound to get in this country, they're gonna find a way anyway. But at the same time, I think putting more protection down there will temporarily stop it. Me personally, I'm not against immigration because that's how America was founded, by immigrants. But I think there's proper channels to go through and do it. Skipping across the border through underground railroads or through the tunnels or across the border and back of trucks, that's not the way to do it. So I think that putting more protection down there, regulating it, and at the same time, we need to maybe push that process. So when people do apply for citizenship through the right channels, they're not waiting 6, 8, 10 months to get it done.
Okay, college libertarians, you have.
Young Americans for Liberty, yes. I believe that the idea of sealing off borders is just a terrible idea due to the fact that if you look at the majority of economists and what they agree upon, and not something that is sponsored by some rhetoric, that the immigrants that do come into our country complement our economy. They come in, and we're based on major service industry, and that the immigrants that are coming in are low-skilled workers, and they're taking a lot of the jobs that other people won't otherwise have. On the opposite end of the scale, we bring in immigrants who are high-skilled, and they come through the process. So the idea of sealing off the borders, as he stated earlier, people are going to come in, and who's to say that these people who are coming in can't start businesses, can't be entrepreneurs, can't change, what we do for the better and what have you.
No, I don't think sealing off the border is going to be a solution to anything, for one. Also, immigration isn't something that exists in a vacuum. Immigration, especially undocumented immigration, spiked in the mid-90s, and there's a large reason for that. A lot of our trade policies with Mexico, for example, that country is the home country of many of the undocumented immigrants. The trade policies we enacted destroyed the agricultural economy in Mexico and many other Central American countries. So it's not like there's people just sitting in these countries saying, well, time for me to go illegally immigrate to the United States because my country is inherently bad. There were real reasons that have pushed people to want to come here, and it's very complex. But sealing off the border isn't going to stop those other things from existing. So this is a multifaceted issue we have to look at. Sealing off the border is not a solution.
Okay, and the next question is for Young Americans for Liberty. In his State of the Union address, President Obama threatened to use executive orders if congressional gridlock continued. What are your thoughts on his position?
Congressional gridlock, the whole idea, personally, I live within the bounds of what, how I exist here. I believe that it has a certain influence on me, but that as the political, I suppose, stance as it exists is that it doesn't really impact me as, a lot of people would like to make it think. I would want to live within my bounds and things like that here on the local level. I mean, I choose to remain ignorant of that. Ignorance a negative connotation, but there's the idea of public choice theory, that the idea of becoming informed voter when I have to work a 9-to-5 job and things like that. I'd just rather be doing things of that sort than, paying attention to all that type of thing personally.
Okay, and then college Republicans are about it.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. In his State of the Union address, President Obama threatened to use executive orders if congressional gridlock continued. What are your thoughts on his position?
I'm sorry. You said you used executive order for congressional gridlock?
If he said he was going to use it if congressional gridlock continued.
Like I said, going back to the immigration, they're going to find a way to get over it anyway. But at the same time, it's going to what the college Democrat said. It's not going to solve the issue. I mean, he said you do have these skilled workers who may come over here because they find work or they're highly skilled. But I mean, they need to be documented because at the same time, we don't know who's coming over here. We don't know what their background is, what they've done in the past. It needs to be documented. So we're not saying that we need to shut it down completely, but do, like I said, more regulation of who's coming and who's going. I mean, there's criminals coming over here. There's people coming over here. There's gang members, child rapists. Who knows who's coming over? So I think we need to actually regulate what's coming over here. Not saying they can't come over at all, but go through the proper channels and do it.
The reason that President Obama, by and large, has decided to threaten executive action, and threaten is a very strong word, but use congressional action or executive orders for congressional gridlock. First off, the congressional gridlock has been going on, and also a lot of things have happened in its wake. Unemployment benefits for millions of Americans have been cut in its wake. Now, if we were just going to sit here and out of some idealistic notion say, oh, hey, there's congressional gridlock, that's where our founding fathers would have wanted. Well, yeah, that makes us all feel really warm and fuzzy inside, but it also means that a lot of people are going to lose their money. A lot of people are going to default on their rent. A lot of people are not going to be able to do a lot of things that are healthy for the economy that the people who are causing the gridlock seem to want or claim to want. So yeah, I think in a certain sense, not from some ideological standpoint, but from a practical standpoint, if it means something's going to stop, something that affects people negatively from getting done will happen, I'm not some purist. I do think that eventually you have to look at the effects on human lives. And if doing something is going to cause something positive, even if it's ideologically uncomfortable for somebody, I think that you should do it. I believe in practical results. And not, at the expense of, oh, I feel ideologically pure.
May I use a challenge? Sure. So you're saying that it's practical that, that he would use this executive order to, kind of just fix this congressional gridlock. So at what point is using this, power, this executive order power, encroaching on people's rights as they stand, whether that be the people in Congress or what have you, using this long reach of force that might otherwise negatively impact someone?
Well, I think it's assuming a lot that it's going to reach into the depths that are being implied here. But with respect to, say, executive orders, we've seen more executive orders out of presidents that have come long before Barack Obama, and I haven't seen a dictatorship rise up in the United States. I'm saying that there are issues, like example, the ones I use with, say, unemployment benefits, that I do think it's better to have some action taken rather than just watch gridlock happen and watch, oh, that's the way it's supposed to be, nothing's supposed to happen. I don't think that there's a rule you can measure when it's going to reach into somebody's lives too much. That's a complicated matter. It has to be taken by case-by-case basis.
The next question will be for the Democrats. If San Marcos or the state of Texas were to pass a similar law to Arizona's immigration law, which requires state and local law enforcement to reasonably attempt to determine the immigration status of a person involved in a lawful stop, detention, or arrest, what would be your stance on that law? And how do you think it would affect the San Marcos community? And do you think it is unconstitutional?
Personally, no, I'm not against that. I'm against that. I'm not for that. And I will say that it's well documented that this is already in Arizona. Not well documented, but the early signs of this law are showing that it's racially discriminatory towards dark-skinned Latino citizens in Arizona. Texas, as being one of the highest Hispanic populations in all of the states of Texas, I can't imagine it would be much different. I don't see much reason to believe it's going to be much different. And especially San Marcos, which has a huge Hispanic population, I don't think that would be ideal for this city.
You have 1 minute 15 rebuttal.
Generally speaking, or most notably, I would have to agree with everything that Jaime was saying. The very notion of, a higher institution requiring a law that basically they would have to profile people to identify them. How otherwise would you suspect somebody of being an illegal, other than by looking at them, by their actions, by their decisions, and saying, I have reason to believe that this person is illegal. And to live under that fear as a Latino or as, an undocumented immigrant or just even a regular person because you might be approached anyway, it's just something terrible to walk out in the streets and, go for a cup of coffee, but have this fear of this predatory bird that just is, flying around here and the police that would just come in and just unreasonably and unconstitutionally just search you because they have a long-winded notion that you might be an illegal.
As much as it hurts me to say this, I actually have to agree with both of them. I think it's going to get very, very ugly because just because someone looks dark-skinned, they look dark-skinned, it is going to provide a very big prejudice against it. So I mean, unless you have concrete proof, just going on a pure hunch, I think it's disastrous across, particularly South Texas. I mean, if you look at down from Laredo to here in San Marcos, it's a very, very high Hispanic population. You go from Laredo, you go to San Antonio, you go here in San Marcos, it's a very high Hispanic population. So again, I agree with these two. It would get very, very ugly and very nasty really quickly.
Well, we'll be moving on to the topic of national security, so you all have 1 minute to.
All right, we're about to enter our third section of the debate. National security and Ray will start us off.
The first question goes to the Libertarians, and it's dealing with national security. What do you think of how the Obama administration has dealt with ISIS? If you disagree with the way it was handled, what other measures would you have taken?
I think Obama and his administration dealt with it the exact same way Bush would have, and the exact same way Clinton would have, and Reagan, and I mean, in perpetuity. I believe that when you kill an entire generation of people on the basis that their rulers attack your rulers, they're not going to be happy, and it's going to create this cyclical violence in which there's inbred hatred for America because your father's father was killed by America and then his father was killed by America. Whether the reason was initially good or not isn't really up for debate at this point. ISIS hasn't attacked us. ISIS hasn't posed a domestic threat. And so I don't see a basis for intervention yet. I'm not entirely opposed to it. However, I don't want to go on the slippery slope that's proven to be so violent and bred animosity toward America. And it's also a matter of extremism. It's not the entire country of Syria or Iran. It's a matter of a few people. So, of course, that makes it harder and it makes it more difficult to track, but we don't really target by individual. We target by geographic boundary, and we target by large groups and settlements. Innocent civilians around there or not, we're going to do what we need to secure our borders, and that's it.
Hi, Jonathan.
All right. Yes. We'll do it right after everyone has a chance to respond.
Are you sure? Because I killed the last challenge. I don't want to hear this one.
Next. So we have a minute and 15 seconds to.
All right. What was the question?
The full question was, what do you think of how the Obama administration has dealt with ISIS? If you disagree with the way it was handled, what other measures would you have taken?
Okay, well, I think that limited response is warranted, and I think it's the better option than just sitting back while genocide's happening and saying, like, we're the good guys, we're staying out. And, I mean, maybe it's a lose-lose because, yeah, we'll make enemies. I'm sorry, but we don't have a clean slate. We already have enemies. They already hate us. You know what I mean? Whether or not we go in there, it doesn't, they're still going to be angry at us. I guess if it means stopping ISIS or at least slowing them, then I agree with it. Not to mention we have multilateral support from other Western nations, like Germany sending the Peshmerga arms, and France saying that they want to get involved. So I do think that as a multilateral option, because Iraq and Afghanistan were a failure. We didn't. At the end, we really didn't have multilateral support there, and I guess we would agree that sending American guns over, because I'm not for hard intervention like sending boots on the ground, because that proved you can't send American guns to fix people's ethnic problems that have lasted longer than America's been a country. So if it means airstrikes, I mean, we already have the missiles, we already have the weaponry. People, like Obama says, when there's trouble in the world, they don't call Moscow, they don't call Beijing, they call America. I do think that we have a responsibility as the biggest guys on the block to help fight injustice.
If you take it back, like way, way back, as the 1940s, personally, Adolf Hitler never attacked America. But because we had one dictator, had a whole country under his thumb, it's kind of like ISIS. ISIS is a faction, it's an army. They have their people under fear. So I think as Americans, as members of the armed forces, I think we do need boots in the ground. We need to cut these snake off at its head, not just sit back and watch them beheading French journalists, beheading Americans, beheading their own people. It's ridiculous. Because we do have the biggest guns, we are the big brother of the world. It is our duty, not just Americans, but as humanity, to not sit by and watch, one faction of people rule a whole country. So my question to you is, what makes different between, I guess, again, between Adolf Hitler, who was one person who ruled the whole country, whereas you have a faction of ISIS people who I think about having a whole country under its thumb?
Are you challenging me? If
Uh,
you were looking at me, so I was like, I mean, I can take it, but.
It's actually, I mean, it's funny you use the Nazis because that's like a well-known logical fallacy. But no, I think it's a good comparison in this. It is. I mean, there's a name for that. But that's fine. That's fine. So I would say you must. We live in a republic. We don't live in a democracy, and we have ways of drafting articles of war, and we haven't done that. We haven't done that since World War II. In fact, the intervention we are justifying this with the act is like a pre-war on terrorism thing that Bush passed like in his first year. I mean, this is not a war by the people. If the people, as a majority, decided that this is serious enough to declare war, or at least to like simply take a vote on it, I believe it would be justified. But as it stands, we're having people who are entirely disconnected, sort of the military elite calling the shots, which in certain scenarios, that's what we want. But when we've seen, I mean, since 2001, just a constant buildup of war and hatred for America, I don't think following more of the same is in our best interest.
The college Democrats, at what point in an international conflict does American intervention become the clear course of action to take?
I think it becomes the clearest course of action to take when it endangers us. And I mean, I really can't, unless there's some sort of mass atrocity happening at a state level, which ISIS does consider itself a state, and considering that, they control oil fields, they're selling it for tax, they're collecting taxes on it. They're pretty much a state. There's tens of thousands of them, so it's not just some little insurgent group anymore. I wish it was, then probably be easier to deal with, or harder to deal with. You could argue that Vietnam, anyways. What I would say is when it becomes a direct threat to our national security, then I think it is, of course, it's in our best interest to get involved. And I guess that's all I have to say is if it becomes a threat at our doorstep, or even like the 9/11, it was just two guys from overseas that they didn't have an army, they didn't have planes, but they managed to take out using our own planes, they took out our own buildings. So I think I do agree with some sort of like intelligence gathering. I don't know if I would agree with the Patriot Act and the illegal wiretaps because no one wants to defend that. But there does have to be some sort of structure in place for us to identify our enemies and get involved before it happens. Like FDR used to say, you don't watch the rattlesnake bite you, you stomp him out before it happens.
College Republicans?
I think if you wait for any territory to get to your doorstep, it's too late. I think it needs to be something to be done now. Like you said, don't wait for it to bite you. You stop when it's hit, like you just said. So I think boots on the ground, stopping it there before it gets to our doorstep is a logical explanation. I mean, if it gets to your doorstep, it's too late. Once it reaches our borders, by our means, there's no telling how far they'll get before we actually have a defense. You need to go over there and stop it there before it gets over here.
I guess I'd have to say is who determines when it's a national threat, because we justify things all the time through the NSA, even at the airport, that are in the interest of national security, and doing it through undemocratic means by using people who are in the bureaucracy to a sense hold private trials and use private prisons and secret prisons. It's more than a slippery slope. It's undemocratic. It's not in any way indicative of how our government is supposed to operate when it's operating healthy. I mean, which it isn't. But the point being that we should intervene definitely when a compelling interest is at stake. However, that should be determined by the people and not by a select group of individuals who have the power to put your tax money toward anything they want. So I guess I'd say when the people decide, that's when it should happen.
Okay, the next question is for the college Republicans. Do you view Ebola as a national security threat? And if so, should the federal government or state government handle it, and how so?
Well, yes, it's a national security threat. It's here within our borders. It becomes a national security threat. I think it could go either way as far as federal or state level. I think the state should be able to have the chance to handle it first because it is within their borders. But at the same time, I think once you run out of state resources, I think the federal government should be able to step in and like, hey, offer some assistance. But yes, it is definitely a national security threat because, again, it's within our borders. And it should be handled at the state level first to give a chance to handle it there. But if not, then the federal government should actually step in and help us out as we see fit.
Okay, and then Young Americans for Liberty.
I don't think it's a threat, but if it were, I still don't think the government should be handling it. When you politicize something as serious as vaccines or disease, especially a disease as deadly as Ebola, it's going to skew because it's politicized. And so if a vaccine were to come out or if there are benefits that could be offered by the government, they're most definitely going to skew along political lines. We saw this with the H1N1 vaccine. There's been great political studies as how those on the Health and Human Services Committee within Congress, Democrats who were in control got more of the vaccine. And I don't think that's by accident. So no, I think that the government should do everything it can to cater to institutes, research labs that are already trying to figure this out, trying to find out best practices. They should adhere to medical professionals within the private market who don't have anything to gain politically by this. But again, I don't think it's a national security threat.
I don't even know where to start. I didn't think Ebola was that serious. But, I mean, when you have the disease, it's already, running its course where it originated, with places in like Nigeria getting declared Ebola free. I mean, what do we really have to worry about? I mean, we've had 2 or 3 cases? And when you think about 300 million people, and I mean, we've handled ourselves pretty well if we've maintained it to 3, and this whole outbreak scare started, 2 months ago? So I really don't think it's a national security threat. I kind of can't believe this question got asked. That's my response. No.
Okay, that concludes our national security discussion. The next discussion will be over healthcare. We have 1 minute to begin.
All right, we're ready for our fourth portion of the debate. It's going to be healthcare. Democrats have 1 challenge left. Young Americans for Liberty have 1 challenge left, and the College Republicans have 1 challenge left. And Alexa's going to start it off for us. Question of Democrats.
In what areas has the Affordable Health Care Act been successful or unsuccessful?
I think it's been successful in tapping a market of people that previously couldn't afford health insurance, like how we have 10 million new people subscribed and insured. I think that's a great number. Personally, I can say that there's members of my family that weren't as lucky as my dad to have a business that took off, and they've never had insurance in their lives, and now my aunt has insurance, her kids have insurance, her husband has insurance, and this goes for more than just one branch. So I'd say that as far as the goal was, I don't think it went far enough, but I think any liberal will tell you that, just like the conservatives will say that it went too far. I think that we could still do more, we could reach more people, and as far as what's been unsuccessful, I think that if there was any incredible huge flaws, if we could actually work together, we could fix the problem. But I feel like we're getting a lot of heat, with they're not trying to fix anything, they just want to get rid of it. And so I guess I don't want to be over here crying the victim, because we did get it through, and it was, the bill that we put up, even though we had to make some concessions. But as far as, I think it can be improved, but I think it's an uphill battle for that when, the hands that we need to shake ours are slapping them away and saying repeal.
College Republicans?
Yeah. Let's see. The things that are good about the Affordable Health Care Act. I think that he did make a point that, there are more people that are being offered health care. A lot of this has been done through the expansion of Medicare within the Affordable Health Care Act. In terms of things that have not been good, well, the rollout, for one, that was a disaster. I mean, we even had a Health and Human Services Secretary resign over that whole debacle, so I think that was awful. I think that trying to get states to take money to expand their healthcare apparatus within their states and then clawing it back, as Obama has done, was a bad idea. And then I also want to counter the notion that all we want to do is repeal, repeal, repeal. There have been numerous times where we have tried to reach across the aisle, such as the medical device tax, which was a bipartisan issue that both Democrats and Republicans supported, and we tried to get that done, and we couldn't because Obama threatened to veto. So.
Can I challenge that? Oh, you're gonna make me wait. Morgan Scott.
Okay, so I would say that I would agree that yes, there have definitely been some positive consequences from Obamacare. That being said, I'm not going to say that there's never been a thing that the government's done that's completely negative and that there's no positive effects, because there are things that the government does that do have positive effects. But a big part of this thing is that with any kind of legislation, there are unintended consequences. A very large part of the unintended consequences of Obamacare is the fact that these regulations are insane. Nobody really knows what Obamacare says. Businesses are freaking out because they have no idea exactly what's expected of them, what they're supposed to transition. Their costs are going through the roof, which is going to mean layoffs and less people that are working full time, which I know nobody wants. The biggest issue that I have personally with Obamacare is the fact that it is a Band-Aid. It does not address the root problem of American healthcare, which is the fact that American healthcare is a third more expensive than comparable healthcare around the world. And the huge part of it, I think, is IP and the way that the FDA stringently regulates any kind of medications and stuff coming onto the market, because it does create a false scarcity in a lot of ways. But without getting into that so much, insurance companies are a big part of the problem, and the way that system works with the hospitals is a huge part of the problem. And this basically just ensures that the insurance companies have even more people buying their product, and it doesn't really help anybody.
So like a challenge?
One left.
I'm sorry, Morgan Scott. I'm gonna challenge Morgan Scott. All right. When you say that you think that part of the problem is the regulations and all of that, I guess I would just say, and you say that it's a third more expensive than other places that have comparable healthcare systems. I don't think they are comparable, because the ones that, at least from what I know, our healthcare is more expensive than like the ones overseas and catching up with the rest of the world, with their universal systems and single payer systems. So I would say that I don't think. Okay, I guess my question to you is, if universal healthcare has already proven itself to be able to deliver more healthcare to more people more efficiently, sure, we have the highest quality healthcare in the world if you have the money to pay the highest price. That's not the hard part. We know rich people can get better. How do we help poor people get better? So I guess I would say, how do you think the market could provide better than already proven systems like in Europe and other Western countries?
Okay, well, first off, I'd like to point out when you said that the universal healthcare are more efficient than our system, which is definitely not true. Wait lists and stuff, just something to mention. But aside from that, one of the huge things about overregulation in the market, for instance, this is a really big thing, is the extremely stringent regulations and accreditation that MDs are required to go through. The only people in this country legally allowed to practice medicine are MDs, nurse practitioners who can still write prescriptions, nurses, and a lot of schooling goes in to get this, which creates a false scarcity of medical professionals. Now, in my opinion, if we completely deregulated the system, accreditation programs like the current MD program we have would still exist, and people would still want to go to an MD that has that level of education. So that market is secure. But personally, if I'm okay with Amy down the street who studied Eastern, hoodoo medicine or whatever for 10 years, if I'm confident in her ability to pop my shoulder back in the socket for $10, then I should be allowed to go do that without fear of her getting sued, me getting sued. And I think that on a general level, there would be a bunch of different accreditation programs that would come out. People could study for 4 years and open little clinics in their neighborhood for preventative medicine, which would extremely decrease the cost of healthcare, and basically would just give people more options. More options for the public are always better. If you are having trouble affording medication, then I think that, stop it.
All right, the next question is for the Young Americans for Liberty. How would you compare American healthcare to that of other developed countries?
Other developed countries, it's kind of hard. I'm definitely not an expert on medical care around the world. Like I mentioned earlier, I do know that American healthcare is much more expensive than other healthcare options around the world. American healthcare is cutting edge. There's a lot of research and development that goes into that. People do pay a premium for cutting edge and newer treatments that they get here, so that does account for part of the cost. As mentioned before with Josh, I know that a lot of the healthcare systems around the world that are more socialized they do suffer from not being as up to date, from very long wait lines, and so I think that that's not efficient. And like I already said, I definitely think that a more decentralized system where people can pick their own level of healthcare provider and what level of education they have would better suit American needs.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
How would you compare American healthcare to that of other developed countries?
I think American healthcare, going along what YAL said, we have a cutting edge system, and when you look around even at our neighbors, you know, Canada up to our north has a universal healthcare system that they operate under. And essentially the way that that works is if you want to go to the doctor, you've got to schedule your doctor's appointment nearly 3 months out before you're even able to see the doctor. And that means that the large flux of people who actually get sick in Canada have to go to the emergency room, which is, it's not really doing anything. That's not the preventative medicine side of things. I think that, you know, I will say that one thing that the Affordable Care Act, at least in the debate portion, it put more emphasis on the preventative side of medicine, and I think that we're making movements towards doing more preventative medicine rather than reactionary, I don't know what the word would be, but I'm going to say reactionary medicine. But I think overall, I think that that's a good comparison. I think that we are cutting edge, but I also think that you know, in terms of our healthcare system, it is better the way that it is than universal, completely universal senior or single payer systems around the world.
I mean, the data's in. I mean, ours is more expensive and it's worse. I mean, there are wait times. I get that. There have been some anecdotes about how they had to wait 3 months or they had to wait, you know, 4 weeks or something before they could get seen. I'd rather deal with a wait list than just die because I couldn't afford to go in the first place. But, I mean, that's just me. But as far as I would say how we compare it, I mean, I think that we have a lot of work to do. I think that they do it better over there because they do reach more people. And I know that over there it may not be the most efficient, but once you get to trying to control an entire nation, we haven't come up with anything better. You know, we're not on our way to creating anything better. They still live longer. They still have, you know, lower infant mortality rates. They're still healthier as a people than Americans are and than we have been. So I'd say that we have a lot of catching up to do with the rest of the world that seems to have a lot better ideas working now.
This is to the college Dems. What's wrong with our current system of operation that would make it more beneficial for us to move to a universal healthcare system?
Accessibility.
That's the only reason?
It's a pretty big reason if I can go to the doctor or not.
Well, people can go to the ER.
Okay, America's the only country in the world where when you get sick, you worry about your house. You don't want to go bankrupt. Other places, you get sick and you worry about getting better. That's what I want to work towards.
You did just say, though, when you get sick, you worry about paying for your house. You don't worry about dying. One of the points you made earlier was about how Americans know I'd rather, you know, be on a waiting list than just die because not being able to go. Americans can go get health care. Yes, crippling debt comes along with it, and I agree that that's an issue, but it's very rare for people in this country to just die because nobody's going to operate.
Was that a challenge she burned? There was like 400,000 deaths like 2 years ago from uninsured people that could have been prevented. I think that was like I think that was 2012 when that happened. They noted I think it was 460,000 Americans died from lack of insurance because they had easily preventable illnesses that they just didn't treat because they didn't have money. You made me forget what my other part was. Did she burn a challenge? Because I've never been able to outburst. Come on. But what were you talking about just a second ago?
Just said what makes it, you know, what makes a universal healthcare system better than what we have.
It's just, I mean, if I get sick, I'd feel a lot better if I didn't have to worry about money at all, and I just worry about getting better. And if I had that option, I mean, I don't believe that healthcare should be chosen by, you know, I don't really believe in health insurance as, you know, at all, honestly, because I don't think that whether I get care should depend on whether or not someone else, you know, that affects their pocketbook.
Okay, the next question is for the College Republican. After Wendy Davis's famous filibuster to keep Senate Bill 5 on women's health and abortion restrictions from passing, Governor Perry called a special session to pass the bill. What would you have done if you were in Governor Perry's position?
Can you repeat the question one more time? I got lost in
After Wendy Davis's famous filibuster to keep Senate Bill 5 on women's health and abortion restrictions from passing, Governor Perry called a special session to pass the bill. What would you have done if you were in Governor Perry's position?
That's a hard one for me to answer.
Just out your hair. Just out your hair a little bit.
Right. Governor Good Hair, right?
Yeah.
But
Something good.
I think that there were enough people calling for it to come back up in a special session. That is one of his rights, is to call a special session on a certain issue. In terms of the issue in and of itself, I think that that's being dealt with in the courts right now, and we're still waiting to find out what the ultimate end result of Senate Bill 5 and its passage is going to be. So I'm not overly passionate about that issue.
Okay.
So I guess I would have to say that the core of the issue is abortion. I would be pretty solidly in the middle there. I don't think that the state should help fund and subsidize abortions. I think that people should pay for that. I definitely think that bill that Wendy Davis was filibustering did have the intent of trying to shut down the majority of abortion clinics, which I think is unethical. Personally, as a libertarian, I morally disagree with abortion, but I definitely 100% agree it should be legal because it should be people's choice. I would rather, as an individual, try to educate people and bring them to my side of view rather than mandating something across the board. I don't think that's ever a good tack to take. So I guess that just about answers the question. Yeah.
I mean, hell, if I was Rick Perry, I would have just killed it. But yeah, I mean, I agree with what she said. I think it was quite obviously political. I mean, one of the parts of the bill requires I know I'm anti-regulation for a second right now, but bear with me. One of the parts of the bill mandates that the clinics get a $40,000 air filtration machine, and it's like, I mean, I'm all for you making these things safer if that's what the point of the bill is, but put some funding towards it if you really want that. I mean, if it's about elimination, it's about elimination. If it's about getting it better, put your money where your mouth is and make the situation better. That's all I really have to say. I'm pro-choice. I don't think it's the greatest thing in the world, but it's something that happens.
All right, well, we'll be moving on to the economy section next, so you all have minutes to speak out your representatives.
Alrighty, we are on to our fifth and last section of the debate. Thank you for sticking with us and bearing with us. At 9:15 roughly, we'll open it up to Q&As from Twitter and also from you lovely folks. Technically, because Young Americans for Liberty, took it upon themselves to answer one of the challenges that wasn't for them. I think I'll let it slide, and we'll let them have one more challenge. Okay, but you do have one more challenge for this section. And
Fire up there, man.
Nicole is going to start off with the first question about the economy.
Yeah, the first question goes to the Libertarians. San Marcos is the fastest growing city in the nation. Do you think businesses and developments should be able to build on areas with a direct impact on the environment, like the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone?
The problem with this is whenever you have a commonly owned piece of property, you have what's called tragedy of the commons, in that because it's no one's land, it's everyone's land. And, well, I don't have to pick up this piece of trash because it's everyone's land, and the local whatever, the garbage man will pick it up. If those pieces of land were privately owned, there would be a single individual with an incentive to take the best care of that land that they possibly could. That being said, it's a matter of zoning. What can be owned by the public and what can't be owned by the public? Our system doesn't facilitate environmentalism, period. Our system incentivizes us to exploit these natural resources as a collective and justify it through that. But, I mean, that's not very forward-thinking, and it's also a very sort of destructive way of looking at property rights. Again, with the incentive of the individual to take care of this piece of land, you would see a stronger respect for it because he's not going to want his property tarnished. And there's also laws in place stronger for that than there is for public sort of desecration of water and air and other valuable resources.
Can you repeat the question, please?
San Marcos is the fastest growing city in the nation. Do you think businesses and developments should be able to build on areas with a direct impact on the environment, like the Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone?
As far as direct effect on the environment is concerned, like the litigation you mentioned, I feel like they shouldn't, and I feel like city councils, like the one currently, has been consistently voting against that, and they're right to do so. And since those are elected officials, I feel like they represent the people, and so the people have spoken in San Marcos and said they don't want that to happen. And so as far as this is concerned, you can look at it democratically and you can look at it environmentally. Environmentally, I don't think it'd be safe. And democratically, I feel like the people agree. And I feel like they feel like the land belongs to them and not to just a private organization.
I'm actually going to have to somewhat agree with the notion that I think that the Edwards Aquifer, we shouldn't necessarily be growing and building on that recharge zone. What I will say is that there's a whole lot of regulation out there, and there's a whole lot of hurdles that have to be gone through in order to be able to even build anything on that area that might be detrimental to the environment. So I think that there are regulations in place already that somewhat mitigate the risk factor that's involved there. I will say that our city council, our city council is one of those stopgaps as well, and I do agree that their elected representatives and the people have spoken in that matter. I'm pro-growth, obviously, but I think that there's risk associated with certain growth, especially in this area, being around the Edwards Aquifer, and with that recharge zone being here in this area, we've got to take a look at the environmental side of things and make sure that we aren't, damning ourselves in the future.
The next question is for college Republicans. Do you believe welfare is a helpful program? What changes, if any, would you make to the current welfare program?
That seems like a loaded question. So welfare. I believe that, there isn't actually, there might be a couple representatives and senators out there in the state government who believe that welfare isn't a good thing. But I think that at some level, welfare is an acceptable notion to be in the public eye. I think that you do have to mitigate you do have to have things that somewhat, I don't know if stymie would be the right word, but somewhat mitigate a large influx of people on the welfare rolls, because at a point we're getting to the point where anybody and everybody can get on welfare for some reason or another, and there's got to be some regulation as to who is able to get on those welfare rolls. I think that welfare is what I would consider to be necessary. However, I think that there are needs in certain areas. I know that something that's been proposed is drug testing, the working, drug testing and working and things of that nature. They've all been passed around. There's really not been a whole lot of traction on that too much, but I think that, we're working to create a welfare system that is not only good for the people on welfare, but it creates an environment where it won't be misutilized by our populace.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Do you believe welfare is a helpful program? What changes, if any, would you make to the current welfare program?
I absolutely believe that welfare is a helpful program, especially considering that the #1 recipients for food stamps are veterans. I feel like we owe it to our veterans who have served our country to get them back on their feet. And any changes that I would make, well, as far as I'm concerned, I know personally people who have worked in the welfare system when it comes to giving people welfare, and they've seen the people who receive it. And these people aren't lazy bums that just moved off the system. These people are saying that they are looking for jobs and they're working as hard as they can to support their families. And right now, they are only doing this to make ends meet. It isn't just so they can get an easy ride out of it, because living on welfare isn't an easy ride for anyone. And so, I would argue that if there's any changes made, I would make them very mild changes. But as far as drug testing is concerned, I feel like we should also do that for CEOs who want to get raises, because as far as I'm concerned, they have enough money to buy drugs, whereas people on welfare don't.
welfare is a buzzword. It doesn't mean anything. What is welfare? Is it food stamps? Is it, it doesn't mean anything. And so if we're talking about deregulating the market to make it easier for those of lower economic classes to start a business and really sustain themselves, I'm all for welfare, of course. But if it's for being entirely ignorant of human nature and taking out an incentive to better yourself by creating living conditions that aren't conducive to starting a business, to reaching higher educational goals, then no, I'm not for welfare. So of course it's a nuanced answer, but it's more realistic. You can't just shrink welfare in that people will starve and die, but you can't just grow it in that you further take away the incentive for them to better themselves. People always want more. It's natural. So yeah, I think it's not a free ride, but by any means. However, increasing the amount, I don't think that that's going to help their situation. It's about getting jobs. It's about starting businesses that can create jobs for those people. And it's about reaching higher levels of education so more of the job market's open to them.
Okay, and the next question is for the College Democrats. Do you think China's economic status poses a threat to the U.S.'s control over global markets?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, China right now is in a situation where we were at the Roaring 20s, where right now they're facing a huge economic boom because they're experiencing capitalism where there's little regulation. Well, they are a communist government, but they practice economically as a capitalist society. And so this less regulation, I feel like it's going to turn against them because while they may be going really well and strong today, the United States still has more influence over the world economically and just influence. And China right now doesn't have the regulations that we have set in for ours. Like you can just walk down the street and you can tell when you breathe in the air, you see smog everywhere. Those kind of regulations. So pretty soon I think it's going to turn against China, and I feel like in the long run, China won't pose as much of a threat when it faces the consequences of its actions.
Can you restate the question?
Sure. Do you think China's economic status poses a threat to the U.S.'s control over global markets?
No, not at all. I think it's a fundamentally flawed understanding of economics to believe that their economic prosperity means our economic demise. As long as we keep free trade with them, the more they go up, the more we will go up. I mean, of course, not every economist would agree with that, but when you consider the fact that they're selling entirely different goods, their economy is based on goods, where ours is on services, we're not in competition. And that's, I mean, we're not outsourcing to China the jobs that are bringing home great jobs and increasing the median pay of American workers. So no, I want them to do as good as they possibly can because that means better jobs, better living situations for American citizens.
In terms of that question, I would have to agree with YAL once again on a lot of what they said there. One thing that I did want to add, though, is the misconception that China is an ever-expanding economic boom town. You know, there have been numbers that have come out in the last year alone, and these are China's internal numbers showing that their growth forecast is actually, they aren't meeting their growth forecast, which is huge in China because they always tend to peg a growth forecast that they can meet or exceed by a lot. So if they aren't actually meeting their growth targets, they've got a real big problem with their debt in their country. And that's about ready to hit them really hard. They are currency manipulators, which also allows for some of their drastic economic growth numbers that we're seeing. They are also product-based rather than service-based. And one of the important things that we all need to realize is that the Chinese populace, in terms of middle class, upper class, lower class, it's starting to morph to where there is a developing middle class within China that's going to start using the products that China is making, which means that they will end up having less exports out of its country, which they are an export economy. So I think that with their crippling debt as well as the morphing of their society as a whole, I think we're looking at a situation where China isn't going to be nearly as nearly as competitive with us in terms of getting on a higher footing than the United States.
Okay. That concludes our formulated questions part of the debate, and now we're going to open it up to the Q&A session with the audience and Twitter. So anyone in the audience who has a question, please raise your hand. Oh. Would you like to? Yeah, sure. You have 1 minute to swap out your reps.
All right, guys, we are ready for our Q&A session. If you have a question for the Democrats, please address it to the Democrats. If you have a question for the Young Americans for Liberty, please address it to them. And if you have a question for College Republicans, please address it to them. Nicole, please raise your hand if you have a question, and Nicole will choose you, and then we'll alternate between questions from the audience and then questions from Twitter.
This is towards the college Republicans. I don't know why I said college weirdly, but do gay people deserve the same amount of rights and an act just like the Civil Rights Act in 1964, or should we leave it up to the states in order to have still discrimination?
Really quickly, before you answer, you only got a minute.
Okay. This is actually an issue that I think that the younger generation within the Republican Party differs from our counterparts who actually control most of the, state committees and stuff like that. I think that at a younger level, in terms of like college Republicans and young Republicans, we've all come out as those organizations and said that we believe that we're on the same page as you a lot in a lot of those issues, and that we believe that that's something that we largely believe in the duality of marriage and the duality of in equality, really, not duality of equality, but duality of marriage, and that there's a legal marriage and then there's a religious marriage, and we believe that there's a separation there, and we believe that there is a path for everybody to be equal.
All right, for the Young Americans for Liberty. Is cannabis something that should be legalized recreationally across the state of Texas?
Everything should be legalized. All of it legalized. Aside from the obvious, they're all stoners. Texas, I actually believe legalization and at least decriminalization for Texas is going to be on the board and pass here at least in the next 5 years, because Texas does economics really well, and economically legalization just makes sense. The hemp industry coming here, cloth, paper, even green fuels, reusable fuels. I was going to say fossil fuels, that doesn't make sense. Across the board, we're wasting money jailing people for something that is a victimless crime, and we economically could be benefiting from through taxation. Don't agree with taxation, but we could be incrementally, whatever. So yeah, legalize it all. Legalize it, dude. Legalize it. And the drug board.
This is for the Democrats. What is y'all's opinion on President Obama's drone strike program that he has practiced throughout both terms of his presidency?
What is our opinion or what is my opinion?
You got a minute.
I'm just going to be honest. The drone strike program is something that I personally don't agree with, and I think a lot of Democrats don't necessarily agree with that, in all honesty. But of course, we do have to seem like we're unified. The problem with the drone striking is that you are killing people who maybe they're not American, but their life does matter to somebody. And that's been a very unpopular part of his presidency, and there's no denying that. But at the same time, he's not the only president who has had very unpopular parts of his foreign policy. So that is one thing that I don't agree with, and that's all I have to say about that.
All right, for the college Republicans, how are you addressing equal rights for women and ensuring those policies?
How are we? I'm sorry.
How are you addressing equal rights for women and ensuring their policies?
I assume that this is probably more on the health. I'm assuming that this question might be geared more on the healthcare side of things, because, but I think that in terms of the way that we're dealing with that, I'm not, I'm not going to presume what our Republican Party has come out and said on women's rights, but I don't think that we're anti-women's rights in any predicament. Like we were talking about earlier with SB 5, which I'm sure is where this question is coming from. But in terms of SB 5, I think that that's being handled in the courts. Like I said earlier, I believe that the courts are going to decide what the ultimate result of that is. And I think that that will ultimately dictate the path forward for us. So I don't really know what they were trying to get at specifically, but I'm assuming that it was healthcare related.
There's a question over there.
Okay, this is for the College Republicans. Do you support Governor Perry's veto of the equal pay legislation in the past session?
Are you talking to me personally, or are you talking about us as an organization?
You have 1 minute, so you can do both.
Okay. I think that me personally, I don't necessarily think that, I think that there is a means that it can counterbalance each other in the economic environment, and wages can change and fluctuate according to changes within the economic realm. But in terms of agreeing or disagreeing with his veto, it's his veto. I'm not going to tell him that he did something wrong. You know, I mean, he obviously had a lot of lobbyists talking to him about that. I don't.
But do you agree with it?
Do I agree with it? Do I agree with his actions? No.
Are you a Republican?
I
don't believe you anymore.
Did you listen to all the other answers?
All right, and this is for all three, and we can start with the Young Americans for Liberty. How are your organizations going to bring awareness to the importance of voting among college students?
Alright, stop being obnoxious. Okay, so the blunt truth is that the majority of my organization are anarchists and believe that voting is an aggression. And the big reasoning behind that being that almost all legislation has unintended consequences and is infringing on the rights of individuals. Even things like the Equal Pay Act, anti-discrimination legislation. It's our belief that legislation does not affect social change. Social change is why legislation passes. If somebody wants to be racist and discriminate, this is just an example, somebody wants to be racist and discriminate against people, not let black people into their restaurant, I think that they should be allowed to do that. I think it's a despicable thing to do, and I'm not going to patronize that restaurant, and I think a lot of people would agree with me because socially that's our norm right now. And I mean, like, when you change the law, you don't change people's minds, people change laws.
Okay. So,
Quiet, please.
Yeah. Firstly, I would first like to address like the huge issue at hand is that people our age really are disenfranchised with voting. As a matter of fact, most people don't believe in the system. That's why you don't see a lot of enthusiasm. Most of the voters who are going out and voting are older people, senior citizens, and that's why there's such a disconnect between policy and what we actually believe, for our generation. That's why you're not seeing that translated into policy. With that said, what we are doing is, we just had a Rock the Vote. We're standing outside, telling people about voter registration, just trying to get people to vote, register to vote, whether or not you are like a Democrat or a Republican. I also have seen, some Republicans out there doing that as well. But another thing I do want to bring, to y'all's attention is that I have noticed that, a lot of Republicans have also, wanted there to be stricter voting policies, like bring IDs, making it harder for those who are already politically disenfranchised to vote.
So what is our organization doing? We're doing voter registration drives. We're out in the quad all the time. We're trying to bring political awareness to this campus and areas outside of this campus. I think that something that we're doing right now, I know that the College Republicans is doing because they're sitting there with me every single night, is literally making phone calls telling people to early vote. It might be geared towards Republicans, but we want people to vote, whether it's whether it's for the Democrat or the Republican. Get people out. The more participation that happens in our government, the better. And you know, you can't argue. You can't argue with what's going on if you didn't vote in the first place. You know, you had a chance to make that change. In regards to what the Democrats were saying about the ID law, I will say that, you know, it was extremely easy for me to go and vote this last time. All I had to do was pull out my ID. I didn't even have to bring my voter registration card. So I think it's actually easier.
Okay, we'll be taking 2 more questions from the audience. So, you? Okay, yeah. There was someone back there, but you go.
Oh, okay. I know this is kind of like not allowed, but you guys just did it. I want to ask, how are you guys willing to coalition with us as a third party? Democrats first.
I actually agree with a lot of things that y'all said, that all of y'all said. It's just, but it's hard to answer that question because it seems like y'all don't really believe in government. So it's kind of like, I mean, being real with you, like, you know, both, you know, Republicans and Democrats are, it's all about government, legislation, regulation. Even on the Republican side, there's a lot of regulation, maybe not as much as what we would like, but at the same time, it's kind of like, it's hard to mesh that when y'all have such opposing views and have such a stance where y'all want things to be more decentralized. I mean, a lot of things I have to agree with you with, but then, like, how can we work together when that translates into policy, when you really don't believe in translating anything into policy?
I guess the other side of that, because we're talking about YAL here, is I've actually been a part of College Republicans. This will be my 6th year. I'm in graduate school, but we've actually over that 6-year period, College Republicans actually has worked with YAL on numerous issues. I think one way that we can all work together is voter registration. You know, it means a lot when it's all of us trying to get voters registered at the same table. You know, granted, I get that y'all don't believe that, you know, but I also know that there are libertarians running for elections. So, you know, but with that being said, I also think that we can do more debates. You know, we can have candidates up at the front of the room. We can have a Democrat, we can have a Libertarian, and we can have a Republican, all debating at the same time. It doesn't always have to be just the Republican and the Democrat. There is a legitimate third party that is trying to evolve here in the state of Texas, and I think that we should at least try and foster some kind of relationship with that third party from both of us.
And I just wanted to state a quick clarification as far as libertarianism. There are many schools of thought that go under libertarian thought. Anarchism is just one of them. There are a lot of people that do believe in policy, that do believe in government, just of course very, very minimalized. So I just wanted to put that out there because I know that there's a lot of misunderstanding as far as like what libertarians mean. So, yeah.
I thought y'all were just talking about this group. Anarchists.
Oh,
I thought y'all were just talking about here.
Our group is heavily anarchist, but there are definitely minarchists in our group as well. So.
Okay, we'll take one more question from the audience.
Come on, guys. One more.
Okay.
Josh in the back.
For the college Republicans, aren't you worried that registering more people our own age is going to be self-defeating? I can't imagine y'all go out with a smile to register college students.
Actually, we do. You know, one of the fundamental principles that we try and foster within the College Republicans, especially when it comes to voter registration, is we want to get voter participation up. You know, at the end of the day, I think a lot about that when I'm like trying to get college students to register to vote. I'm like, I probably just got a Democrat to register to vote. But at the same time, you know, it's about creating awareness and it's about people getting involved in the process. And if you want to be a voice as the younger generation, we've got to get more involved. We've got to get we've got to get the young people out to the polls. We've got to register people within this area. A lot of the students here are not registered to vote here in San Marcos, so we are not effectually impacting anything that's happening to us directly. You know, we've got to, it might be self-defeating, but at the end of the day, it's an overall goal that we have to register voters, whether they be Republican or Democrat or Libertarian.
question's on immigration for all three. Should the U.S. issue a national ID card to verify legal status? Question was, should the U.S. issue a national ID card to verify legal status?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah. I'm gonna go with the platform here. You know, me personally, I don't necessarily think that a national ID is necessary. I think that there would be some benefits to having one. You know, obviously that's something that would have to be played around with. But our party, at least within the state of Texas, believes that some form of national identification, or at least some way for us to be able to know who's a legal citizen or not, which is kind of like a point in and of itself, like how's that even going to work? But we believe in, you know, having that kind of system. Me personally, don't really see it working out.
Yeah, I mean, like typical libertarianism, it's a terrible idea purely because people shouldn't have to ID themselves unless you're driving a car or something and you're supposed to have a license. The precedents we've seen around the world, national ID cards, South Africa IDing people based on their ethnicity to see whether or not you had permits to be in the right area or the right permit to work a certain job. It just opens it up to a major abuse of power that I think is completely unnecessary. And as far as immigration, I think it's completely unnecessary because I believe that people have a natural right to migrate, and I believe that the way that we handle immigration in this country is atrocious.
No, we shouldn't have a national ID card. I mean, it's already hard enough just trying to wait in line to get a state ID. I mean, and then you have to think about funding. It's not just should we have it. So then you have to fund the program. Then it's just like a bad way to appropriate money, I believe. I mean, people who come over here as residents, they already have certain type of cards and documents to prove their residential status. So I just believe that would just be a complete waste of resources. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you guys for joining us for our 2014 Campus Political Organizations. Big round of applause for the College Democrats. Young Americans for Liberty.